Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another chapter of Experiencer Interviews. And today we've got another amazing soul coming to us from the US. We have Alina Del Castillo on board today. Alina has always had a strong connection to the phenomenon in all its many forms, for as far back as she can remember, with her earliest encounter with it taking place at the age of 3. It was then that she saw a small gray next to her crib, and the first time she ever had any kind of exposure to beings different from us. Although it scared her at the time, it would later prove to be a catalyst for her quest into understanding the mysteries of the universe and our place in it. Throughout the years, as she got older, she came to better understand the phenomenon, her connection to it, as well as the very reason why she's here, some of which she has shared in a chapter she wrote for the Consciousness and Contact Research Institute, which will be releasing a 4-volume book set called A Greater Reality. In it, she shares some of her experiences, which range from healings by non-human intelligences, a UFO intervention, an encounter with a blue being, interactive dream, physical visits and messages, paranormal experiences, as well consciousness explorations and reality-altering experiences that have allowed her to bend perceivable reality. The one thing that she knows for certain is that there is an intelligence that not only interacts with her, but also guides, and at times has even intervened for her as she moves through this physical plane of existence. Through these experiences and messages, she has come to understand the nature of her purpose here and how there is a small segment of this world's population that are here as volunteers in service to humanity as our planet transitions into a higher dimension and level of consciousness. One thing is for certain, it is that there are many people currently having contact with otherworldly beings that are here to help awaken humanity to this understanding so that we as a planetary race can make this quantum leap in consciousness and finally evolve beyond the duality and corruption that has plagued this planet for far too long. The time has come for this paradigm shift, and this is why she's here to share her understanding and message. So thank you so much for coming on, Alina.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So let's start from the beginning. So according to her biography, your story started at the age of 3. What happened?
Okay, so at the age of 3, I had an experience while laying in my crib. I still was sleeping in a crib in my parents' bedroom, where my twin sister also slept in her own crib. We slept lined against the wall. She was in front of me. And I used to have a hard time falling asleep a lot when I was, a toddler. And I remember laying there and I just looked over and I remember seeing a glow on the wall. And I was like, what is that? And I remember rolling over to see what the light source was, which is when I saw a being that would be what you would consider a gray being, but it was like a child. It was small. I would say it would be something equivalent to about my age, like about a toddler type. And I remember that it glowed. Its skin was translucent, and you could see his heart, and the heart also glowed. So I remember being quite surprised and scared when I saw that. I didn't know what it was. I had never seen anything like that before or heard of anything like that before. I was only 3, imagine. So I wound up screaming for my mother to pull me out of my crib. And she did. I wound up laying on her bed for the remainder of the night, like completely puzzled as to what it was and wondering if it was still there and what it wanted. Like I just remember that was what felt like one of the longest nights of my life. So that would probably serve to be one tremendous catalyst for my quest into understanding, our connection to the universe, even though at that time I already naturally had kind of an understanding that I was different. Like I remember a conversation that I had, when I was a little girl. I was only 3 at this time, also with my twin sister there as well. And I remember we were having tea time and my mom asked us, she's like, so what would you guys like to be when you grow up? And my sister just went for the obvious. She wanted to be like a teacher or something like that. And I remember telling her that I knew that I was different and that I came here with a very special purpose, to help, I said to help humanity. I didn't say humanity yet because I didn't have that language back then, but to help others or whatever, however a 3-year-old might have said that. So I just distinctly remember growing up feeling completely like foreign to everyone around me. Like I remember looking at my parents and seeing them like children, like things that they would say, like the way that they would process, like things that they would explain to me, like that how things worked. I always remember thinking like it felt so like basic to me, and I just remember not being able to relate to other people my age. And I knew I was different, and I felt special. I felt like I was special somehow, whatever that meant. And so growing up, I had a very, very intense passion for, everything related to the phenomenon, and metaphysics, ancient alien type stuff, like when they would talk about ancient Egypt, Greek gods and all that type of stuff, like Greek mythology, which we've later come to find out is both of those have connections, extraterrestrial connections. I only came to find that out way later in life. But yeah, I was also very fascinated by psychic phenomenon and that kind of thing. I was always very, very curious. I also had kind of this belief that I should have superpowers and that I should be able to manipulate reality. Like I always kind of felt that I could, move objects with my mind and stuff like that. And I never understood why when I would attempt to do that, it wouldn't work. And so one little quick anecdote that I'll share only to, to like kind of illustrate how, there was a little moment that something did happen. I must have been 5 years old. And I was laying on the couch with my sister. My mom had given us each a little bag of M&Ms. And when I reached the end of my bag, I was like, this can't be. I need to have one more. No, I wasn't ready for it to be over. And so I was like, there has to be another one. So I started to like rip through the seams of the little pouch. And I remember my sister asking me, what are you doing? I'm like, I need to have one more M&M. She's like, but the bag is empty. And I'm like, no, there's going to be one more for me. And just as I got to the final seam, I literally ripped it and I literally saw an M&M manifest right out of the seam. And I said, told you. And I ate it. So, I had kind of that tendency to kind of like think that way, except, of course, you say that to your parents and they're going to be like, you're crazy. What's wrong with you? That's not how things work. And so obviously by having that kind of doubt planted, into you, even though you know that things are possible, that automatically kind of cuts off that energy. But anyway, so, basically that growing up, I had, a constant quest for that. Like while teenagers were out, drinking and starting to like go to parties, my excitement, the thing that gave me total euphoria every Friday night was to watch sightings or watch Unsolved Mysteries or X-Files. Like that was my obsession. Like those were the things. Halloween when I was a child growing up, I remember I would make my mom cut our trick-or-treating short just so that I can go watch, stuff on, like seances and all that type of stuff. Which actually brings me to 2 things that happened to me when I was a child that I didn't really quite realize what they were until much later on. In fact, when I met Mary Rodwell, which a lot of people might be familiar with Mary Rodwell, who's a researcher and an expert, she I know that she kind of has an expertise on star children and stuff like that. And we came to meet her in Miami because Ray flew her down to teach us her modality. And it wasn't until we met her that she explained what a screen memory was, that I kind of, had the epiphany of like, okay, finally 2 experiences that I had make sense to me. And even the attributes with which she explained it made sense. And one was when I was 7 years old, and it was Christmas morning. I remember I was laying in bed with fever. My sister was laying next to me. And I remember getting this, like knowing that I had to go to the window, and it was like maybe 7 in the morning. It was really early. It was just right at dawn. And I remember I knew I had to get up to look out the window, but I didn't feel very good at all. I had fever and I didn't want to get up, but that gnawing feeling that I had to get up to look out the window kept bothering me. So I'm like, ugh. So I forced myself out. And when I looked out the window, I saw Santa Claus on a sleigh. And mind you, I lived in a building, an apartment building. I was on the 5th floor, so we were pretty high up. And he was just floating by. And I'm like, oh my God. And I tried to wake my sister up. She didn't wake up. Nobody saw it but me. And then I went back to sleep and I was like, wow, I really saw that. And that stayed with me always growing up, like, wow, what's up with that? You know, as you start figuring out that that's not a real possibility. Then later on, when I was 9 years old, I was out with a group of kids in the same apartment building, like just going through the floor, trick-or-treating through all the apartments. And at some point I knew I had to stay behind to go to where the stairs were, which faced outside. Like, you know, you could see the, you know, the sky and everything. And I knew I had to stay behind to go look at the sky. And I remember knowing that it was only for me to go see. So, and I tend to be, you know, like I was 9 years old, so I wouldn't have felt comfortable ordinarily to be left behind by myself in a building at night. But I'm like, you know what? Like the curiosity for whatever this motivation to go look, you know, up the stairs was stronger than whatever fear I might have had. So I went to the stairs, and sure enough, once again, there was something there, and it was a witch on a broom flying right by me at that very instant. And I'm like, wow, that was so cool. And I'm like, I wonder why I couldn't get my sister to come with me. Like, something always happens that keeps that from taking place. And so that's what I remember Mary Rodwell explained to us at that time, that those are memories that we have, you know, so that we are able to like process what, you know, without it being something that's scary or that like makes us go into resistance. But typically it's something that only one specific person is kind of, you know, like it's something like that where it was only for me to see. So when I was 17 years old, I remember that I started to experience being able to leave my body at will. So I started having out-of-body experiences. And the way that it started was that I remember one night that I went to sleep, and I remember having this sensation like if I was being pulled out of my body by a vacuum. And it was a really like strong sensation of being sucked out of my body. And then I was like racing through this tunnel, like at lightning speed, and all these lights, like different color lights alongside me as I was, you know, floating through this tunnel very rapidly. And then I wound up in a place where there was like these screens in front of me. I had two friends there that were my closest friends at the time. And I started to be shown different life experiences that were future experiences that hadn't taken place yet, but they were, you know, traumatic for a teenager. There were things that, you know, potentially would have made me kind of maybe go into like, you know, maybe get a little traumatized. Nothing really heavy, but just enough for a teenager to not be happy. So I remember being shown that as an advanced warning, which, by the way, as a side note, later on in life, I would come to notice that that still happens to me to this day. I don't see it in life review form, but I receive information in dreams that's subtle enough that I don't remember it consciously, so as not to, I'm sure, impede upon my natural responses to it, because I'm sure it's things I have to experience. But in a very subtle way, I always seem to get notified of something that's coming that I have to kind of be strong to get through, right? So that's kind of been a theme also. Since then, that's the earliest time that I can remember that taking place. But yeah, I was shown all these different events. And then in the dream, I remember saying to my friends, okay, guys, it's 4:17 a.m. It's time to get back to our beds. Let's go. And as soon as I said that, we fell out of the tunnel. We landed in my parking lot, and I go, okay, guys, go home. And as soon as I said that, I woke up, like suddenly, like jolted awake, and it was 4:17 a.m. So that was an interesting one. And over the course of the following years, everything that I was shown came to pass. And it did help me. It kind of helped to kind of level the reactions, I guess, or the traumas or whatever.
Just getting back to the gray, I was wondering what type of eyes did the baby gray have?
Really large eyes, like a gray, like very much large eyes. The nose was just little, like, you know, very like little nostrils and a little slit. It was very much the type of face that you would associate with a gray, but the skin wasn't gray. That's what was interesting, is it was flesh colored and it was translucent. And it, you know, maybe it was about 6 or 7 years ago, I saw an image on Facebook somebody had shared, and it was that exact same being that I saw, that exact same being, same flesh colored, translucent skin. I was like, oh my God, like there it is, you know. So
was it standing? Was it floating?
No, he was leaning up against the wall. And I would say I couldn't tell if he was sitting or standing, but it felt more like he was kind of sitting, leaning up against the wall. And it was like I said, like a toddler, like about 3 years old, like about the same age as me. A more notable moment that I would say moving forward was actually the irony of this experience was that it started off with a paranormal experience on a ghost tour when I went to Asheville, North Carolina. Um, we were on a ghost tour and I wound up taking a picture of the front of a bar. It was at 11 o'clock at night. This was a place where children were not allowed because it was only bars that were open. And the tour guide had told us to be sure to look at your pictures in the next 2 days because in their 17 years of experience, for whatever reason, after 2 days, things tended to manifest. And I'm like, I should only wish to be so lucky. I don't have that kind of luck, but okay. And I had taken a picture particularly of that place because there had been over 100 deaths in that particular strip, and that place in particular, they used to kill criminals at that time. I'm talking in, like probably a good 200-300 years prior. So when I took the picture, I looked at it because it was in the very beginning of iPhone. So I'm thinking 2008. And so I just had to make sure that the name of the place wasn't blurry so that I could research all the stuff that had happened there. And once I looked, it was visible, and that was it. I put it away. And about 2 days later, a friend of mine's like, yeah, let's go check out if there's any ghosts in there. And I'm like, yeah, right. There's not gonna be anything. Don't even worry. And she's like, no, I want to look. And she starts looking. And then when she gets to that particular picture, she's like, oh my effing God, what the? And I'm like, oh, stop. And she's like, no, I'm serious. There's something there. And when she shows me, it's a little girl standing at the front, which obviously, like I said, there was no children there at the time. And she was actually standing in between the glass. She had no irises in her eyes. She had like a purplish red trail. I could provide you with that picture if you'd like. It's actually copyrighted. So it's registered in Capitol Hill because it's a pretty substantial picture to me. She's standing in between the glass. You can see her foot in front of the wooden frame. It's a two-door type situation. And she literally seems to have posed so as to leave no room for doubt that that's not a physical person. I later on got into contact with the place, and sure enough, they had haunting experiences and people even quitting that place because of the fear of these experiences. And so that particular experience for me was kind of what opened up the floodgates for me. So that's why it's relevant in a way, because it became the catalyst for a lot of things that came to happen to me, including being visited by a blue being at night. Because what wound up happening is right after that, I don't know if she followed me home, but let's just say that I started to have the ability to see energy. I was always able to feel energy growing up, and I can sense it, but I was always scared. So maybe I kind of blocked it out. I was always really scared, like, oh my God, I'll freak out if I see something. So I kind of like firewalled that from my experience. But once that happened, there was really no turning back. And I started to be able to see energy like in the form of sparks, orbs, all sorts of things. And I started to experience like the feeling of, things coming into my room at night. I saw her in my room one night. I saw a blue being one night standing next to my bed. He was wearing a very much skin tight, like spacesuit, the same color of his flesh. He also glowed, and he was just standing there. And I remember waking up like, what? Like, like when you're like kind of in that in-between state, and I'm like, whoa, like, okay. And then I just went back to sleep. That became a time of very heightened activity for me. I started to vibrate nightly, which I always kind of felt seemed to be like some sort of a calibration of some sort. Something was happening to me physically, but whatever the case was, I started to be able to leave my body at will. I remember one time leaving my body and my consciousness taking up the entire room, which was very sensory, like a very bizarre sensory experience to be the size of the room. Another time I bilocated, so I experienced myself leaving my body, traveling into the next, down the hallway into the living room, and witnessing myself there 2 hours prior. And I'm like, that really confused me because I had just left the room where I was currently in. So that confusion kind of like jolted me back into my body. I remember I used to receive information for people, things. I started to become very like tuned in a different kind of way. So that also I'll say that in those periods where I kind of have those like heightened like activations, let's just say, I also notice that I tend to have for whatever reason, I tend to kind of affect electronics. So yeah, so as I was saying, there's periods that I go through where I seem to, like, I call it like activation phases. Typically, a lot of times those activation phases are triggered by a mild imbalance in sleep. I wouldn't say sleep deprivation, but just a shortage of my normal sleep patterns. For me, at least, I don't know if that's something common with others, but for me, what seems to happen is it's almost like if I'm naturally ADD. So my mind is very, very, very quick. It's constantly analyzing. So what it feels like, it's as if my mental faculties slow down enough to where I'm more tuned into like subtle information, and I start to become extremely psychic, and I start to affect electronics. I remember there was a period of time within 2 weeks' time, I blew out 12 light bulbs. Some of them were brand new and replacements to the ones that had previously blown out. And in one instance, one of them actually exploded as I walked past it. So that was something that happened, including when I gave birth to my daughter. Obviously, giving birth will cause some mild sleep deprivation as well. I think any mother could attest to that. And it was then that I mean, literally anything that I would touch would break. My laptop, the washing machine, like radios, I would break them. I did have light bulbs there as well, but not as often as that other time. But yeah, it's a constant thing. There was one time where my friend and I were preparing for a contact retreat in Colorado. We're very excited about. We were going to be participating in a gathering with the Rama group. I don't know if you're familiar with the Rama group, which are a Latin American contactee group. I was a Rama member at the time. And we're both very excited about, everything that was, we're going to be doing on that trip. And I remember, besides being given, I had 2 moments that I did have interventions as well, which is something that I would love to share as well. But one of the things that happened was in the room where I was sleeping at the time in a spare bedroom because I was staying up late researching and reading and stuff like that. And a brand new computer that we had in that room got completely burnt out. Like it just fried. Another time, my friend and I went to, before this trip, to interview a major contactee, Ray Hernandez's best friend, that I'm sure his information is out there. He's a contactee who's had a lot of incredible experiences with the ports and stuff like that, and we wanted to kind of document his experiences. So we were naturally very, very excited. He was showing us the actual ports. So we were like super in that zone. And my car battery winds up dying, fizzling out on me, which was kind of weird because I asked my husband when was the last time that he had replaced my battery, and it was only a couple of weeks old. So that was definitely weird. And again, it was, that amongst other things that had kept, that were breaking in that period of time. Because if it was just the battery, I'd be like, oh, maybe it was a faulty battery. A brand new laptop was taken out, like multiple things. My phone burnt, like it had like moments of like complete drainage out of nowhere and things like that. So that is something that tends to happen to me in these activation phases. But I did also want to mention during that time that I also experienced something that I guess you could call like a divine intervention. This trip was set to be a pretty significant trip for us for many reasons, including what we were going to receive. And also maybe who knows if part of what we were also there to give as far as the frequencies that we bring, because that's something that I later on wanted to mention as far as what I believe my mission here is and what people like us are here to do. But because it was such a significant trip, I started to have situations of like imbalances at home because, there was too many things going on. And I started to have, as a matter of fact, I woke up one morning with an intense amount of pain in my reproductive area. And that particular morning when I woke up, I didn't realize until later on that I was covered in bruises. I had bruises on my wrist, on my upper arm, on my legs. But the one on my wrist that was particularly painful had syringe marks on it, which I thought was very strange. It was a phenomenal amount of pain that I was experiencing in my reproductive area, and that particular area where the syringe mark was very much bothering me. And I carried about my day. I tried to do my best to kind of work through the pain. But when I got home, I remember at some point I was walking through my living room and I suddenly had this incredible sensation of like sleepiness, but like out of nowhere. It was so intense that it felt like if I had just taken something for sleep. Like that's how intense it was. It was like beyond my control. Like I literally had to lay down on the closest thing to me because I felt like I was done. And so I laid down on my couch and I remember like it was like if I was completely immobilized. And I remember as I was laying there, I started to become very, very cold. And I experienced an energy enter through my feet. And it was like an electrical current, but it felt very strange. Like it felt bone chilling. It was like an electricity that felt bone chilling and strange. It was a very foreign feeling because, you know, I haven't mentioned it, but I've had throughout the years, including especially, and that's what I was going to mention earlier, that during the time that I was vibrating nightly and being able to leave my body, I was also experiencing moments where I'd get like kind of recalibrated, like if it was too much or if anything that was too, let's say 3D, that would take me out of that kind of like loop of connection. Something would come and kind of sweep through my body and kind of rebalance me somehow, recalibrate me somehow. So that's actually when the first time that I remember that happening. So I've had it happen throughout the years when I've experienced too much drainage, like some sort of an intervention takes place where they help to stabilize my energy. But in this particular instance, I felt it sweep through my body. And when it reached my head, I felt it leave. And I opened my eyes and I saw a purple orb, like a plasma looking, it looked very like three-dimensional plasma orb floating in front of me. And it took me a couple of hours to be able to get up because I was freezing cold, but I wound up feeling much better. And the following week, which was leading up to this trip, I started to have what appeared to be symptoms of like cyst ruptures, but too many back to back, which is not normal. That's not something common. It was just very strange. I was having very strange things going on. And once again, I was walking through the living room and the same feeling of this intense, uncontrollable sleepiness took over and I had to lay down. But this time I was kind of like hyper aware, like, okay, it's happening again. Okay, let's, you know, like kind of to like mentally record as much of it as I could consciously. And as I laid there, once again, I felt the energy, this electrical energy enter my feet and once again sweep through. And once it exited like through my head, I opened my eyes like, okay, I want to remember what this looks like. But this time it was a plasma orb, but it was shattered and it looked like if it was made out of liquid, like it was like fragmented and scattered. Like if whatever it had to do was so massive that it didn't make it through intact. But once again, what I had was relief. And because of those two experiences, I was able to take this trip without having all the seemingly disruptive health issues that I was having during that week and whatever might have caused it. Because like I said, waking up with bruises everywhere it was strange. It was definitely something strange was going on at that time. So yeah, so I had that, and I'll circle back to one other experience that was actually included in Preston Dennett's book, The Healing Power of UFOs, as well as Beyond UFOs, which is the free organizations, the academic work that they put together. This story was shared in both of those books, and it was also with a purple orb. And in this case, it was an injury that I obtained on a toe when I got a pedicure. And I had gone out to, do stuff, and I must have stepped into muddy waters. And I went home, I took a shower, and I went to sleep. And as I was was sleeping, I started to feel this incredible, like extraordinary pain, like more than I would think is normal, and like pulsing, and it was just incredibly, like it was worrisome, like the kind of thing that you might think you have a serious infection that might require you to go to the doctor. And so because I was in that semi-asleep state, I remember going into prayer, but it felt like if I was in a more direct communion with the universe, because I wasn't fully there. There was no thinking, the words were just coming out. And as I was doing this, I remember knowing to look to the distance, and I could see a pretty large orb, like about this size, like just paused in front of me about 20 feet away, almost like if it was waiting for me to register that it was there. And as soon as I did, I started to see it travel towards me, and I could see a trail of energy behind it. It literally stopped right at my right shoulder. Once again, it's like if it paused, like, okay, take it in, register it. And it went into my shoulder, down through my body, straight to where my foot, where the injury was, and took the pain away completely. So that was another experience that I had. Those are the 3 only times that I've physically seen the orbs, but I've had those happen, I would say a good, I mean, at least 15, 20 times that I can remember. One of the times that it happened, as the current entered my feet, the power blinked in my house. The power like literally blinked, like everything turned off for a moment. At the very second it went through my foot, and then it came back. And what was interesting is I later came to find out that the power blink the power blink happened in my entire block, but only my row of houses. So whether it was coincided, but it was literally the very instant that that current entered me, that happened, and it felt like if it was directly connected to that. So that's another one that took place. So yeah, so I've had those types of things happen. That I could flash forward to like a couple of other curious things that happened. This would be like after I met Ray Hernandez of the Free Organization. He's actually a really good friend of mine. He also runs CCRI, the Consciousness and Contact Research Institute. You know, he and I became good friends and stuff, and I started to become connected to a lot of different people, not through him only, but through others as well, as far as other experiencers and people like us. And I remember during that time, actually that's when he brought down Mary Rodwell. And so that particular period of time was very interesting because we wound up having a class. It was about 7 people, where she taught her particular modality of you know, regression. And so after, you know, that class, it was very interesting because everybody was healers, or, you know, people with some sort of psychic abilities. So that made for it to become a little bit more interesting because I started to tune into, like, tap into all these different individuals and receiving information and all of that kind of stuff. And that was interesting. But the more interesting thing that came to happen was within a week's time of having done, you know, that class with her, there was one night that I was sleeping and I felt a being come to my back and start scooping out stuff etherically from my back. And I was awake. It woke me up and I was awake, and I could still feel that things were being scooped out energetically from my back. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I have to remember it. So I could tell my classmates, and I wound up becoming fast friends with a couple of them that I'm still friends with to this day. And I'm like, this is weird. This is interesting. Okay, I wonder what's going on. So I kind of just let it happen because I knew it was nothing bad. I knew that they were kind of healing me. But as the night progressed, then I saw a lime green syringe, like a needle, being put into my eye. And I knew not to move. I knew they were doing something to unblock my vision. But I was seeing this lime green needle going into my eye, which incidentally, having mentioned the gentleman that I interviewed that caused for me to be so excited that the car battery drained, he that particular day mentioned that he as well had a lime green needle put into his eye. So I thought that was a really cool synchronicity. So once I shared this experience, because I did have it happen a couple of more times throughout the night. They kept coming back and doing more work on my back and scooping out energy. So when I reached out to my classmates, because I knew it was connected to that, I could tell that there was some sort of a connection to having this class with Marion. So when I mentioned it to one of them, she's like, "Are you kidding me? The same thing happened to me." And she also had her back be scooped, and I'm like, "Oh my God, so we need to check in with these other people, see if anybody else had this happen." And two more classmates had it happen, except for them, it was their throat. Which ironically, those two people are both in, you know, a line of work where they're, you know, they're healers or they're sharing their messages, you know, vocally. So it was very interesting that that was also happening. So four of us had these experiences at that time. I also shortly after that, I would say about a week after that, so it was all very much in quick succession. I remember one night that I had not been able to sleep. We had tried a group of people that also included these same classmates and others that were experiencers as well. We decided to like kind of attempt CE5. But you know, there was too many scrambled energies and not everybody had their mind focused on it, and that was that. The excitement of having done that and all of that kind of kept me up the whole night. I couldn't sleep. The next day I was kind of like wide awake the whole day, but not having slept anything the night before. So as you already know by now, that's kind of like a feature of when things kind of tend to happen to me. So when I went to go to sleep that night, I decided to go sleep on the sofa, you know, because my husband was still watching TV. So I was like, I'm just gonna go to the sofa. And when I go to the living room, I remember it was a very interesting feeling, because when I went to the living room, I felt the room was electric. And all of a sudden I heard a sound go, and as soon as that vacuum sound happened, the pressure in the room changed and my ear popped. And I was like, okay, I know there's someone in the room. This is not even a feeling. This was an actual pressure change. The room became electric. You can hear things kind of crackling in different parts of the room. So there was definitely something there. And I remember getting annoyed because I was sleepy and saying, if there's anything here that's not of the light, you must go. And if you are of the light, all I ask is that you let me sleep. And as soon as I said that, I closed my eyes, and I literally, in that very moment, found myself inside of what you would consider a ship, because it was a gunmetal colored metallic room with a panoramic window that spanned the entire width of the front portion of this room. And I could see the planet Earth in the center from a distance. And I remember I was seated at a table, and there was three beings to my left. I couldn't see them, but I knew there was three beings there. At that moment, they handed me a clipboard with a list of volunteers, a list of the names of volunteers. And I remember myself and one of my good friends now that I met through Ray, his name was on there as well, as a lot of other people that are all involved with this mission. They started to share with me what I'm here to do. They had mentioned the Brotherhood that was here to assist humanity in its shift in consciousness, to usher in the new age, and a lot of very elaborate information, because I do remember that there was these etheric cubes that were about this size, and it was volumes of information contained within these cubes, and they would just drop them into my head, and I'm like, yes, oh my God. Like I remember like getting so excited. I'm like, yes, I know, that's why I'm here. Oh. And then I remember in the dream asking, may I please exit the dream? I need to write this down. I want to share it with one of my friends so that I remember when I wake up. And they actually allowed me to exit the dream. And I wound up writing to one of my friends in detail. And I wrote, oh my God, they're saying this. I'm going to go back in. They have more to share, but this is so interesting, whatever. So I go back in, and they kept showing me all this information, all this stuff, the work that we came to do. And once again, I'm like, no, wait, I got to remember this. Please let me out. Can I leave one more time? And then I shared with another friend more of this information, which, by the way, during this dream, it was a 9.5-hour dream. I was both consciously aware of my body being asleep in the room, and my consciousness being in that ship. So that was definitely very interesting. When I tried to find the other messages, I never found those because it was too many texts had passed and I never thought to look until way later. But one of the messages I did find some of them, and it was mentioning a brotherhood that was here in service to humanity, that they help oversee this ascension that we're all collectively experiencing. Once again, another thing that came to happen, because everything was in quick succession during this period of time, I had gone to an event that was kind of a little bit of a test of will, if you will, where we had to go do a series of things like walking on glass, walking on coals, and all this different stuff that required for you to like kind of have all your like mental faculties very like like in a very focused way, so you can get through these things that would normally scare you. So that took a lot out of me. I remember it was very, very draining. So after we left, we were all very taxed because it was hours of like tests of will and all this kind of stuff. And so anyways, as I was driving home for the first and only time in my entire life, it was 3 in the morning by the time I was driving home. For the first and only time in my entire life, I started nodding off while I was driving. And I lived pretty far away and I had to take an expressway. So I remember I called one of my friends that was there with me and I'm like, do you think you can stay on the phone with me? Because I don't think I can make it home. It's kind of late. My daughter's birthday was the next day. I didn't want to have to stay somewhere in order to, I wanted to be home. So I asked and he said, no, I can. I'm in the middle of something. We'll talk another time. And I'm like, oh. So I wound up saying, okay, well, let me try to wing it. And so I'm driving, and at some point, I'm losing complete control of my person. And that's not something common for me. I know I've driven CB many times, but it was, like I said, so draining, that kind of an activity that I just couldn't get it together. I wasn't even in control of myself. And at some point, I just know I was nodding off, and I was on the highway and I thought of pulling over, but it was like at this point I was too far gone. It was like, I wasn't even fully there. And as I was driving, at this point I was approaching what would be like an overpass, like bridge on the highway. And I was approaching that, which if you're nodding off is not a good thing, because that could be very much, by the way, it was also curved. So if I would have been nodding off, I would have been driving right off that curve. So that's where I was at. And I was not fully conscious. I really was not. But at some point as I'm driving, like I'm kind of like opening my eyes, trying to keep it together, when I saw 2 circular golden lights kind of hovering at a distance past the curve. And when I saw that, like the mind always needs to kind of make sense of what they're seeing. It was 2 floating lamps, but with no post. So immediately my brain is like trying to go through the Rolodex of possibilities. Like, wait, how is that? How are they floating there with nothing holding them up? I'm like, what? So that immediately like perked me up. Like, what the hell am I looking at? The inquisitive mind, you know how that is. So so immediately I'm like kind of looking at this, and then I'm able to drive to this curve without nodding off, because that would have been detrimental for me because it was too close for me to have a response time. So as I'm driving closer, I realized that there was a third like gold lamp thing floating there. But when I started to drive underneath it, I can see the underbelly of a ship that had kind of like a curved fan shape like this, and it was metallic, and it was a complete underbelly. But what blew me away is I'm like, how is that possible? There was never anything surrounding the top part of these lamps. So I'm like, what? And it was so low that if I would have thrown up my bottle of water through my moonroof, it would have hit this thing. And it took me, I would say, approximately 10 seconds to drive the length of this thing. It was easily the size of a football field. It was huge. So that really like blew me away. I'm like, what the hell just happened? I was like completely like beside myself. Like I couldn't make sense of what that was, because again, I only saw the lower part of it. And of course, even though we're aware of these things in our conscious awake state, it was just too much for me to understand that I just saw that. So the next day I wound up speaking to Ray on the phone, Ray Hernandez. And I'm like, Ray, like, what do you think that was? And he's like, duh, Alina, you should know that was a partially cloaked ship. Hello. And I'm like, oh my God, duh, how did I not think of this? You know? So I'm like, okay. And so I could, safely say, like, it took me years to kind of look back and realize, like, I think I might have had my life saved by a ship, So,
Did you
for all
see
intents and purposes.
anything come out of the ship? I mean, like you said, it was metallic, but how was the surface? Was anything like any objects coming out of it, or is it smooth?
No, it was completely smooth, and all you see is the lamps. So it formed a triangle, but there was nothing on there. It was completely smooth, and it was metallic, and it had a fan shape on it. That was it. There was nothing else on it that I could tell you. So that was pretty, pretty crazy thing to have happen, because like I said, it was low enough that I could have easily have hit it with a bottle. It was low enough and huge. I remember speaking with Desta, Desta Barnaby, fellow Canadian, she's a good friend of mine. And I remember telling her about it, and I remember thinking, like, you're in this field and you're around a lot of people that, share all sorts of stuff and experts and stuff. Like from what you've heard, like, what would you say that was about? And I remember, I'll never forget what she said, because when she said it, I was like, oh my God, like when you hear something that kind of like your soul recognizes as truth. And she said, and it's gonna sound a little out there, but she said, Alina, that was most likely you from the future stopping you from fucking up the timelines. So, like, as let's say, an intervention from your future self to make sure that you don't mess up the timelines, because there are things, that I'm meant to do, or, experience, mainly do, that would have potentially have been sabotaged had I have not made it because of that. So I'm like, man, that strangely makes sense. Like, it just like it touched me somewhere, like, okay, yeah. So that was another thing that happened. All of this happened within a very short period of time. Let's see, I had a lot of different things happen throughout the years after that. One of the friends that I made during that time, that's one thing that I thought was kind of interesting. One of the friendships that I made was with a person that I definitely could tell there is a connection that involves mission, but also that seems to be kind of orchestrated by the beings. I don't know if you're familiar with a book called Love Bites. Yeah. So that's kind of, this is not a romantic friendship or anything like that. It's just a connection that very much feels like it was brought together by these beings. And the amount of things that have happened with us and to us has been so extraordinary that I could write a book on just that alone. When I first initially met him, I distinctly remember that's when I started to experience like little Mandela effect type of experiences, where little physical aspects of our reality would literally change before our eyes. All sorts of little like hacks would happen that were very like bizarre. Little things would happen, and it was back to back, and it was only ever with me towards him or him towards me, or when we were together. Like all sorts of like really curious things. And almost like it felt like if somebody was reaching out, I even came to think, could it be us reaching out to ourselves? It was like so many things that I couldn't even, begin to catalog all of them. But it was definitely elements of our physical reality that started to shift before our eyes. And so, this is a person that I had like a real unconditional love for, which is also kind of a strange thing, because unconditional love is not a typical emotion for someone unless it's your child. That's not, people say it, but to actually have it is a different thing. It's something that you know when you have it, because it's that far removed from what's, normal. And once you've had a child is the only time that we can really say we know what that is. And I had this real deep unconditional love for this person. Like, I know them, and I remember thinking, there's a reason for this. Like, I knew that there was a reason for that. But I remember that there was constant interference that would take place with us. Like, if we would begin to create projects or things to be in service, something would somehow get in the way. And it was like so obvious that it was like, wow, like it was constant. And the other thing that was very interesting is that I had people constantly giving us messages. Like they would tap into him through me or vice versa. By the way, the person that introduced us was Ray Hernandez. So he kind of sensed some sort of a parallel or camaraderie energy, like some sort of parallel energies or something like that. And so he introduced us, and that's where, you know, that came about already. But the fact of the matter is that the thing that I also noticed is that whenever things would get a little bit too carried away, like with the interferences and all sorts of tests, that there would be divine intervention. Like all sorts of very curious things would happen to make sure that we would somehow realign. Like he had experiences with being told, like by a being, to reach out, to me, like all sorts of like really curious things. Like things would appear, like if I'd ask for help, it would appear a message written on a wall with the ant, like all sorts of little kooky things like that. But it was definitely a dynamic that I came to later on understand through a series of like synchronicities, let's say, that this was also partly an experiment by beings that do not understand human emotions. And so they were kind of putting us through the tests to understand if this unconditional love was destructible, to understand how far they can take it before they corroded something that was pure. And so the amount of things that would happen would ordinarily not, a dynamic under that kind of pressure and those kinds of tests would never survive. And I don't think I would have ever spoken to anybody else that I had those kinds of tests with, and yet nothing would break us apart. And as friends, you know, and because we also have this mission. And I remember earlier this year, as a matter of fact, knowing that this was the final test and something big happened, and it and like a whole bunch of like synchronicities to kind of show me that I wasn't imagining things happened. And it was like, okay, if you survived this, we're done. Like that was it. You passed the test. And it's interesting because even he received that message. I hadn't told him anything. I had numerous people also tell us things to kind of say, like, you know, that, you know, like kind of dropping hints of this fact, you know, because I do consider it to be a fact. There was so many things that you know, that had taken place that leave no room for doubt within me that this was part of an experiment by these beings. But we were being overseen and guided by some sort of a council, because I did come to have an experience with a council member that was not human. I remember experiencing this being that was a woman in a white robe, who had like a bridge. Her eyebrow bridge was raised. I knew that she wasn't human, even though she looked very human otherwise. And she communicated to me, you know, that we needed to transcend all of these hurdles because we had important work to do, and that we could not allow ourselves to fall behind on our mission. So that also happened. And so, yeah, it's been a very, very interesting, you know, dynamic to experience, but also knowing and having a hyper awareness. Both of us have this hyper awareness that there's something else behind this. And he, as a matter of fact, was the first person that shared with me about the Love Bites book. And he said that he, you know, that he kind of has, you know, that kind of understanding that those types of things do happen. And he didn't kind of figure it out till way later. But the minute that he shared that with me, I'm like, oh my God, that's what this is. I obviously didn't want to tell him that because that can be misread as, oh, are you saying this is romantic? And it's not. It was always very much a dynamic that was meant to transcend, to serve our mission, you know.
You sent me 2 videos of UFOs over your house. Could you describe what happened?
Oh, okay, that's another interesting one. Okay, so that was during the time that I was writing my chapter for Ray's book, A Greater Reality. So I was very much in those frequencies, and I was also having to my research with my things and stuff. And I remember one day I was driving home at night, and I was just heading towards my block. I was about 2 blocks away. It's like a neighborhood, and I could see this like fireball, like an orange ball of light, but it was like, it looked like a fireball hovering in what appeared to be my home, because from where I was, I could tell that it was in the distance, you know, the location of where my home would be. And I'm like, oh goodness, I wonder what that is. So I tried to get there as quickly as possible, hoping that it would still be there. when I get there, and sure enough, when I parked my car, it was still hovering over my house. So I got out of my car with my phone and I started to try to record it. And as I'm standing there, it starts to drift away. And I'm like, wow. I'm like, okay, if that was something, show me another one. And as soon as I said that, literally, the minute I said that, I looked up and there was another one right above my head. Mind you, the other one was already trailing off to the left somewhere in the distance. So I'm looking at this other one. I'm like, oh my God. So I filmed that one as well, which is the second one that I sent you. And I'm like, wow. So I'm like, well, the beings know that I like my validations in threes because, gotta be a little bit particular for my own, my own evidence. And I'm like, well, okay, I want to see one more. If this was really something, show me, because this one also started to drift off, which I'm guessing was with the, I don't know if it was because of the wind, who knows? But I said it, and all of a sudden, once again, I see a third one right above my head. And mind you, it wasn't like I was seeing something appear from the distance and show up. It would just manifest directly above my head, and then I would watch it kind of like drift off. So I thought that was very interesting. I included that in my chapter. Ray asked me to include that. I wasn't going to include it just in case, because, I don't always know how things might be received, but it definitely felt like something because of the fact that I had asked for it, and each time that I asked, I got another one. So, and right on cue and right over the same spot, so definitely was an interesting thing. I also have had different ships show up, like little things, like when I'm having conversations, like if I'm driving and I'm having conversations about the phenomenon, particularly during the time that I was in Rama, we'd go so deep down the rabbit hole, my friend and I, like talking about all this stuff and getting so excited. And that I noticed that like high vibrational kind of like excitement and being in their frequency, because you're talking about those, that subject matter, like it always somehow I would see like a little silver disc like show up at a distance, which I'd always kind of be like, wait, but could that be a plane? But it would just be like this little silver disc, and then it would just disappear. One of the times, because again, I do like to have some sort of a validation. I don't want to assume everything is something. But I remember thinking, okay, but if that's really a ship, like I want some sort of sign that it's really a ship. So I'm driving and I'm seeing this little silver disc, and then all of a sudden another little silver disc shows up right, in front of it. And I actually witnessed as they started to fly towards each other, and at the point of inception where they would have collided, they literally both blinked right out and disappeared.
Creature, what is that? What are these things that I keep seeing? They've been hovering over my house. Look, there's another one back there. But I've never seen anything like that. I don't know what it is. It looks like a little fireball. Sorry, because I'm trying to look at it with my eyes. The fuck is that, man? We always want it to be something cool, but I don't know what that is. I've never seen anything like that before in my life. It could be a plane, but it's just shimmering orange and red. And look, they disappear. And from afar, like 2 blocks away, I was seeing them, and they were the whole time hovering over my house. And they're going off. This is my house. And they're going off to the side. But they just show up over my house, and I don't get it. What is that? It's flying away, but what is it? Super weird. I don't know, is that a drone? I don't get it. Here comes another one. Look, are these drones? I don't understand. There's another one. But they keep appearing only over my house. I don't understand. They're not coming from behind. They just show up over my house and then they start flying off. Look, look. I don't understand what I'm looking at all. What is that, man? Are you seeing this? I'm gonna stay out here to see if anything else like this shows up, but it's like one comes and it fades. Look, that one's starting to, oh, I guess it's not starting to fade. then it disappears, and another one appears over my house, and then it fades. What is that? Are these drones? Like, I've never seen a drone like that. I don't get it. And it doesn't look like a red light. It looks like a little tiny, like a small fireball. Like orange and red. Look, that one's gone. Let's see if another one appears. So far I've seen 4.
So I thought that was very interesting. Another time, actually, this was also written about in Beyond UFOs. Okay, so Dr. Joseph Burks interviewed me for for that chapter, for that little portion that of my story that was shared. And he had asked me a series of questions based on what I had witnessed, because apparently there was an attribute to that story that kind of is unknown thing that I didn't know about. And what happened was that I was driving with a friend down a highway. It was a cloudless day. There was not a cloud in the sky. And I remember seeing this little silver disc once again show up, like right in front of my view as I was driving with a friend. And then all of a sudden I saw it disappear and then reappear somewhere else. And then it disappeared and it reappeared somewhere else. And for some reason, I always kind of knew where to look, which it didn't hit me until afterwards. I'm like, how did you know where to look? Like, but it kept doing that. And I remember knowing when the last time it was going to appear was, for some reason, which again, at the time seemed completely normal. But in hindsight, I'm like, how did I know that was the last time it was going to appear? And I remember kind of looking out into the other cars because we were kind of in a gridlock with traffic. Nobody else was looking. Nobody else saw it, just me and my friend, who's also an experiencer, by the way. And I remember as I was looking, like, oh my God, did that really just happen? Like, whoa, all of a sudden I see a black helicopter show up. It looked very wasp-like. It was black, unmarked helicopter, and it made no noise. And it just started to fly around very erratically as if it was looking for it. And then it just disappeared. And that was the element that Dr. Burks was kind of focusing on, because apparently that's a phenomenon, the black helicopter phenomenon. I had no idea about that, but it made no noise. And it seems to have been somehow looking for this thing that appeared in front of me. So I thought that was very interesting. And that was shared in that chapter. Yeah, I have a bunch of little things that I can share. I'm trying to think of what else, because I don't have I had another note and I can't find it.
Have you ever seen shadow beings?
As a matter of fact, I'm glad you asked. When that happened with the lucid dream, the 9.5-hour dream that I had, the following evening after that happened, I remember kind of wrapping myself in a little bubble of light to protect myself, because I was having a lot of things, weird things were happening during the day that I kind of felt like it was like there was interference. And so when I went to sleep that night, I just, I invoked a little bubble of protective light, and that was it. And I went to sleep. And while I was sleeping, I remember at some point feeling like something was hovering over me. And when I opened my eyes, and I couldn't tell if it was my physical eyes or if it was my, I don't know. But I remember seeing a shadow being trying to look at me, but I could see like a convex bubble, which in that moment, it didn't occur to me was because I had invoked a protection. At that time, I just remember thinking, how weird. It looks like he's looking at me from like if I'm underwater. Like, it's so weird. What's going on? And he kept kind of like looking around, like, what's going on? Like, why can't I reach her? And he looked a little bit annoyed that he couldn't reach me, and then he just gave up and he left. So that happened literally the following night after that dream with the ship. So yes.
Can you see the shadow being quite well through the energy? Did it have a hat, or how was its head?
That's a great question. I don't remember it having a hat, but I remember kind of knowing it was a shadow being, because it was very like, or whatever it was, that's what it felt like to me. It was very just like almost like a silhouette, or like he was less solid. Like, he felt very much like, gray, misty, or I don't know, like it was just like a not solid being, like an etheric being. I don't know how you would describe it, but that's what it felt like. And I would say it was more like just a regular head. There wasn't a hat or anything like that. So I don't know if there's a different term for that, but I remember feeling that it was like a shadow type being. feeling that I always get, again, when I'm going through these activation phases, is like I've always kind of had a feeling like if somehow there's a signal of mine that is amplified and it is detectable, not just by physical, whoever measures that, but by beings. Like I could feel like I'm somehow on a radar, put it that way. That's just a sensation. But this being definitely felt like a scout sent to investigate me. I was having a whole lot of interference at that time. Very strange things were happening to me, and it was constant for an extended period of time until I finally eventually went back to my normal, state, and then it kind of just stopped. But yeah, there was definitely a lot of that happening. What else is, yeah, there's been a lot of things. I could say that I've had since then, I've had a lot of different experiences where I've kind of become very hyper aware of the nature of reality, being very permeable, ways in which, let's say, this simulation, to put it that way, that we're in, is very much feels like a game that we're all playing in this collective dream, where I will start to see, it's almost as if all the elements in my reality start to kind of become almost like a language. They like different series of things from different sources start to like show me signs, like information. Like it's almost as if I were tapping into like an encrypted layer of reality where I'm kind of being guided to like see or understand something. And that's something that's been happening to me for years, where I'll start to kind of figure something out, and it almost allows me to outsmart something that's going to happen to me, or almost like if I'm kind of being shown maybe somebody that I'm going to have an interaction with, like it almost kind of like gives me like a heads up on how to maneuver around it. Like it's like there's too many things to think of one specific example, but I have had a lot of things, to the point that I document them, because it really does feel like a language, and I'm naturally very much wired to detect patterns. So I notice very minute details, and I start to string together the connection, and that's, I believe, what gives me the access to go deeper and deeper into like how the nature of reality works, to the point that sometimes I've had electronics interact with me and give me information through like things becoming rearranged. I remember one time I was helping that friend. He was writing a book, and he needed help with a particular subject matter. And I remember saying, like, he's like, "Oh, can you help me with that? See if you can find any information." I'm like, "Okay, I'll help you." And I wasn't having very much luck finding anything. So I said, "Okay, beings, help me out, guide me, show me." And right then I remember having I have an Apple computer, and I had the notes open, and I see something that just says R in my notes, and I'm like, "What is that? I didn't write anything that says R." And I'm like, "What's that?" So when I clicked the folder open, it said the beings communicated with her. Now keep in mind that I never asked for their help out loud. I said that in my head. So when I saw that, I'm like, "What?" And I was gonna grab my phone to take a picture, and the minute I went to grab my phone, it went and it disappeared. Oh, no. So little things like that will happen to me. So yeah, technology has used itself to give me messages, to like things will become altered and rearranged and things like that. So I've had a couple of really funny things happen with that. I just thought of something else I wanted to share with you, and it kind of left my head. So let me try to remember, because there's a couple of cool little things. Well, I could tell you that last year I had a period of time of, again, extreme activations, where I started to have some curious experiences, one of which was there was a day that I had gone really deep down the rabbit hole with a friend, talking about, our connection to the universe and the creator. So it was like a really deep rabbit hole. And I remember it's like as if everywhere that I would look, that information would show itself, the same answer over. Because I asked him, like, "Is this the right answer? Like, this is what my soul is telling me." And everywhere I would look, from the moment I woke up, it was everywhere the same phrase in different ways. People would text me about something and say something random, and it was the answer. I would look at a magazine, it was the answer of the movie. It was like everywhere. But the point is that by the evening time, I remember I was helping my daughter with art piece, so she asked for an archival ink pen, and I had two of them in a little caddy, and I went to grab one of them to give it to her. That they were identical pens, you could see them from overhead, and I went to give her one of them, and when I grabbed it, I felt the pen change shape in my hand, and it was such an intense sensation that I felt like if my bones were on fire, and I was like, what the? And when I looked, the pen said the same message that I had been getting everywhere. And mind you, I don't have a pen. I've never seen that pen in my life. I've been using that caddy 20 years. That's a pen that did not exist before that day. And so I was like, what the? And I looked at it and I'm like, and it originated as the other pen, the archival ink pen. So it literally changed shape. It shape shifted in my hand to continue the theme of giving me this message. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And around the same time, I also was very, like, my energy was very charged up, like I mentioned, with the way that I affect electronics. And I remember I went to go wash my hands, and I saw that when the water would hit my hands, it would create white smoke, like vapors started coming out of my hands. And then when I went to go plug in this little light fixture that I have that you could place like a crystal on top of it, and when I went to grab the plug to plug it in, my hand turned it on with the electricity in my hand. So I definitely feel like there's something with that, which is pretty curious. But yeah, there's been a lot of that type of stuff as well. So and there's still something else that I wanted to share and I can't remember. So hopefully.
Well, since you had this ghost experience, have you ever had poltergeist stuff happen to you in your house?
Poltergeist, no. I've had one time that I had felt something pretty wicked in my home during a time when we lived in an apartment where there had been people that lived there prior to us that were santeros. If you're familiar with, I don't know if you're familiar, Santeria is a Cuban voodoo. So they work with voodoo, and it's, lower astral type stuff. And we moved into an apartment where those people practiced that. And there was things that we would discover inside of the air vents that had like cat's eyeballs and all sorts of things where they practiced this voodoo stuff. And so the house had an energy about it. But I feel like when you're vibing high, those types of things can't reach you. But when you're energetically vulnerable, it's like, there was a moment in time where I remember I felt something really, really kind of evil in my room. And things like kind of being moved next to me in my bed and like things like that. But that was pretty terrifying for me at the time, but I didn't really experience consistent activity, just like once or twice that I had that feeling. My father was being kind of haunted by something because he tended to suffer from anxiety. So he seemed to have been kind of like a target for whatever this was. There was a time that something guided him to go drink a bottle of hairspray in his sleep. So he was being kind of targeted by this thing. He became very ill living in that house. But for us, since we were always kind of happy kids, it kind of never touched us, except that, like I said, during that period of time that I had like a little moment, a little teenager low point, and it did kind of try to mess with me once, but never again after that. So
Well, you said you had a sister. Has she had any experiences like yourself?
well, she's my identical twin sister, and no, she has not. So yeah, she's very much, she's curious about things every now and then, I'll share, but she's not really interested in it, and she doesn't have that kind of connection.
So, Alina, I think you wanted to share with us a story regarding an ant being.
Yes, actually, I had an experience years ago. I want to say about 10 years ago. This was during a time that I had become physically ill for like a year. And doctors couldn't seem to figure out what was wrong with me. And it was a very trying time for me. I remember, one night going to sleep, feeling very sad, not knowing if I'd be able to be here to raise my daughter. And I remember going into prayer, asking for help. I went into a really profound state of surrender, and I asked to be shown what was wrong with me and to please help me. And when I went to sleep, I remember once again, I found myself instantly in this place. It was like a cavernous dwelling. very much felt like an underground type dwelling. And I found myself surrounded by 9 ant beings. I was in the middle and they were all standing around me. They were about at least 8 feet tall. They were huge. And they each had a stripe on their neck that I understood at that moment to apparently indicate their position in the colony or something like that. And they began to communicate with me telepathically. And they expressed to me that I knew why I had become ill because I had stepped away from my path. That was during a time that I had become very disillusioned because I was very much alone. There was nobody like me around me, and Facebook was filled with a lot of charlatans and a lot of people that were like posing as one thing and had no real connection. And it just turned me off so much that I had walked away for a year. So they said, you know what's happened to you. You have walked away from your path and your purpose here, and the time is fast approaching for you to come back online. It's time. And when they explained that to me, I'm like, I knew that, like it was like something that I knew on a subconscious level, that's why I had become sick, because for all intents and purposes in my entire trajectory here in this lifetime, that was the first time that I had taken a full descent into the 3D, to put it that way. Like I had completely walked away from it, and it was something like a part of me was missing. And so they had communicated that to me. And I'll tell you that also when I was around them, like I remember having a very profound feeling of recognition, like I know them. It was a very profound feeling of love and like familiar, like the feeling that I would associate it to is like when your mother picks you up early from school in kindergarten, like that feeling of like warmth. That's what I felt from them, and I felt a deep gratitude and love for them. And I came to find out that the Hopis speak of the ant people, and the way that they describe them is very, very much in line with the type of energy that I experienced. And so that was a really kind of interesting experience that I had. I also came to experience something else that was kind of curious, which was one evening that I was asleep on the couch, and I remember opening my eyes and seeing a woman standing from a distance, dressed in black and white. And I was too sleepy to really care, so I went back to sleep. And then as I continued sleeping, I felt like I should open my eyes. Like I felt like she was still there. And when I opened my eyes, she was a little bit closer. And I was like still too sleepy to care. So I'm like, okay, she's still here. And I was like, I went back to sleep, and I don't know how much time must have passed, but this time I felt like somebody was standing right next to me, and I'm like, okay, what's happening? And I opened my eyes, and she was right there, and she was wearing a dress that was half black, half white, and her hair was also black and white, like it was like like streaked. And I remember being like pretty blown away. Like she was like this presence. It was like kind of breathtaking to me. And I remember being told that I would one day understand who she was and to trust that. And so for 4 years, I kind of always wondered, but I knew that the answer would come one day. And so 4 years later, I was listening to a woman that had learned about, she was a practitioner of past life regressions, and she had figured out how to do future life progressions. And when she mentioned some sort of a curious element that happened with a client that wound up progressing into a future life, and when she said that, it was like an instant knowing that I was experiencing my future self, and that what I was being shown with this black and white was that represented that aspect of me would obtain what is called in some traditions an alchemical marriage, which is the balancing of all polarities, like the internal oneness, which is when you truly do become, the self-realized human. So I understood that that's what I was being shown, to like have patience, hold steady, because even though you're going through it right now, you're completely out of balance and like losing it, like a time will come where you will achieve that balance, and you just have to be patient and go through the motions of it. So that was what I was being shown at that time, that I had been sick for that year. So that was also kind of a very curious and kind of breathtaking experience that I had as well.
So like, let's call it a night. Now Do you have like perhaps another story you might want to share or a closing statement to tell everyone?
A closing statement. Well, what I would like to say is that I do consider myself to be what's known as a volunteer, also known as a wanderer. For people that have followed the law of one, the raw material, there's a term called wanderer, which are beings that are here to assist humanity at this time of shift that we're making into the higher planes of existence, where we're having a quantum leap in consciousness. And so not only is humanity set to have that experience for those that are ready, but the planet herself. And so I believe myself to be a part of that collective of beings that is here in service to this planet. I understood that since I was 3 years old. It's a role that is both passive and active. Passive in the sense that by mere virtue of our presence, because we've already done this, I recognize that I have already been through this type of transition elsewhere. So we're able to sustain a larger amount of vibrational frequencies, and those are the ones that this planet is being flooded with at an accelerated rate, where if only 3D natives would be receiving that, it could have possibly have been detrimental to the survival of the planet. So because of people like us that are here kind of as anchors and pillars, but we're also like transmitters of these frequencies, we're able to hold down that energy and anchor it into the planet. And that's also why I believe myself to be also like a grid worker. I believe that I am, I'm guided to go to certain places, including Mount Shasta, which I haven't been able to pull off yet, hopefully soon. But we're here to also anchor in those frequencies and activate different locations on the planet and bring that vibration up for the collective to be able to make this quantum leap into the new golden age for humanity. So that's what I believe I'm here to do, and I do it humbly in service to Mother Earth and for the collective of humanity.
Well, that's beautifully said. Thank you. Now, I know this is your first time coming out, so I know this interview's been a long time coming.
Yeah.
And so yeah, thanks for the courage to finally come on and share your story with us.
Thank you. I hope that it's received and that it can help anybody else maybe out there that's maybe feeling a little bit alone or doesn't understand what they're going through, that they know that they're not alone. This took everything in me to not freak out. I've been cringing on the inside the whole time and hoping that my words are effective enough to be received by your audience and whoever is ready to hear it,
Thank you. And to those watching, I hope you enjoyed today's interview. I'm your host, Mr. Great. More interviews coming up, and I'll see you guys next time. So take care, everyone. Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Great, and thanks for watching today's episode. If you are an abductee, contactee, or experiencer, and you believe that your story could help others, please feel free to contact me through my YouTube channel email. When it comes to experiencers, the ET phenomena, and the future, remember, truth will out.